there is this constant persecution and war, in a sense, against Christianity that has been going on for thousands of years, pretty much since it started, with Jesus. It's never stopped. They're estimating those statistics that around 30 plus are killed a day in Nigeria by these groups. So that's a lot.
This worldly authority that you can see commands you or dictates that you do something that violates the authority of God. That's where there's friction.
The more persecution was coming against the church, the stronger the church became. If they hated me, they will hate you also. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. What do you think is the big threat? Well, thank you for tuning in for another episode of the KOB ICC podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about, I think, a really important topic. My name is Nick Enfantino, and I help pastor the church here in Bahrain. And this is
Joshua Chabeda. Yeah.
Chabeda.
I help out.
Yes, a man of many hats as well. So, and one of them being co-host of the podcast, among others, worship leader, admin, discipling partner, preacher. Maybe there's probably a few others in there.
Just a couple.
But today, as I mentioned, we're talking about a very important topic, which is something very relevant. And just starting off, before we get more specific here, we're going to be talking about the state of the world, and specifically the state of Christianity in the world at this day and age, which is a very turbulent time. There's been a lot happening in the news and media, in global politics and events. So we want to just talk about how we should view these things, getting into some of the specifics of what's actually going on. Some of these events are even news to me, and I think maybe to the viewers. But before we get into some specific instances and events, Josh, do you have any thoughts on just the state of the world today, generally speaking? How things are looking out there?
Generally speaking, I think it depends on perspective. Like if you're looking at it from the, kind of technological side, things are moving. Things are really advanced now. I think one of the things that's in the news and the media now more than ever is like, artificial intelligence, AI, ChatGPT,
right.
All these new, AI tech companies and such. So obviously, there's a lot of innovation, but there's also a lot of concern with these things. And so you have kind of a polarization of, different communities where it's like, yeah, this is great. We should continue to push this. And then, on the more conservative side, it's like, no, we don't know what the long-term effects of, these technologies are or could be, even how it affects, the workplace. I know a lot of people I've spoken to, and I've been just looking online and seeing how many people are just concerned about job security and things like this.
Right.
So that's just, from one side. Spiritually, I would definitely say the world is in a darker place than even just 5-10 years ago, I would say.
Yeah.
Living here in the Middle East, I think it's been an interesting position to be in, just because I feel a little bit more insulated, a little bit more like kind of shielded from, things that are going on in other parts of the world. But even here, there's a lot of spiritual darkness, a lot of things that you just become more aware of. I think the more you understand God, the more you understand just how things should be versus how things are.
On a global scale, you're saying?
I would say on a global scale, for sure. But even here in the Middle East.
In the Middle East, obviously very turbulent. I mean, this is the epicenter for a lot of the political unrest, religious unrest.
Yeah.
I'm grateful to be in Bahrain because it's very safe here, and actually a great place that you do feel quite shielded, I think, from the turmoil of the rest of the world, even the United States. I'm grateful to not be in the United States even now for various reasons, which we'll talk about maybe a little later on in our conversation here. But yeah, Bahrain is great, but we are kind of right in the middle of a lot of.
It's kind of like the eye of the storm.
The eye of the storm, yeah, the way to put it.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your mention of even the technological advances and AI and all this stuff. And what I've been noticing, and probably because I'm Christian and my feed is a lot of Christian influencers and material, but it's like everything, the technology, the politics, the culture, everything seems to to me, come back to Christianity. It all
Yeah.
it all just somehow comes back to Jesus and Christianity. And, I was even looking at some statistics with the kind of the more predominant now story of the persecution happening in Nigeria, which we'll talk about in more detail. But I just checked in on Christian persecution globally, which is always an issue that no one is ever talking about, and it's never in the mainstream media.
Right.
So with this Nigeria situation kind of coming to light, I'm like, oh yeah, there is this constant persecution and war, in a sense, against Christianity that has been going on for thousands of years, pretty much since it started. With Jesus, it's never stopped.
Yeah.
And at some points, it's been more turbulent than others. And right now seems to be an extremely turbulent time for Christianity in world politics and world events. I read that this year worldwide, they approximate 365 million Christians are facing persecution currently. It's in 2025.
Yeah.
And some of that very deadly.
Yeah.
Some of that not as much. And I would say the numbers, depending on how you're looking at it, is far greater than this. With there being, 2.6 billion Christians in the world, I think it's something like that.
Yeah, with Catholicism being like the dominant religion, by like percentage, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah. So that's a huge number. That's a huge number. It's the highest of all other religions in terms of persecution.
Yeah.
And again, it's not something that we're seeing in the media. It's not something that is on mainstream news channels. Again, my feed looks a little bit different. Even with AI, it's like people using AI. Hey, are you the Antichrist? And tell us when the end of times is coming. People using for these type of things. So, I don't know. How
to see what it says.
it's a little bit alarming, if you want to go down that rabbit hole, but that's not what we're talking about today.
Yeah, I'm not sure I do want to go down that rabbit hole personally.
But I do think in a lot of ways that the technology, the culture, the politics are, in a sense, a mask or a cover for some of the other battles that are going on in the world that seem to be a lot more intense in terms of its impact and its need for attention and concern. So specifically the Nigeria situation, I just want to open that up a little bit because that has been, again, more in the mainstream news lately. So I've got some statistics here, but Josh, maybe what are your thoughts on that, or what's your view on that situation from your own perspective?
For me, this isn't news that is particularly new, just because of my family background. So I've been hearing about persecution of Christians for a long time in Nigeria. I know about some of the Islamist extremist groups there that have been really just wreaking havoc and oppressing marginalized groups there as well.
Yeah, and I saw it since like around 2009 or so. It's been ramping up.
Yeah. But it's kind of concentrated in a certain part of the country, more so the northern part. And actually, I remember we were having a conversation the other day with somebody who's from Nigeria, and he was explaining like how, even right now, it's not as overt as sometimes, but sometimes it's a bit more insidious. Like,
you have family in Nigeria, right?
I do. Yeah.
Okay.
So I haven't looked at recent statistics, so whatever you have to share will probably be new for me.
Yeah, it's a little bit of background. I mean, since 2009, I read that there's been 185,000 killed by these groups, these extremist groups. 125 million of them being Christians, and then 60 being liberal Muslims. So just any groups that are not fitting the agenda of some of these extremist groups are a target, it seems. And then lately in the news, they've been focusing on the Christian persecution, which I read that there was 19,000 churches destroyed, 1,001 Christian communities displaced as a result, and over 600 clergy members abducted.
Yeah, abductions are pretty big.
Yeah, another 8,000 abducted, just of Christian people kidnapped.
Yeah.
And then the martyrs, we can call them martyrs. They're dying for their faith. That is the definition of a martyr. Over 7,000 this year. And that was probably a few weeks ago that number came out. So I'm sure it's even more now. Yeah. They're estimating with those statistics that around 30 plus are killed a day in Nigeria by these groups. So that's a lot. I
Yeah,
mean,
so those are very
that's huge.
heavy statistics. And I mean, each of those people is a soul, you know?
Right.
So,
Right. 7,087, the last count,
yeah,
So I think that 87 is important
yeah,
because as you're mentioning there, as you remind me here, like every one of those is it's not a statistic. That is a soul. That's someone
yeah,
brutally murdered
yeah,
for the sake of their belief in God.
yeah, yeah. So
It's pretty heavy.
it is very heavy. And I mean, obviously, these are like the more extreme, actually, the most extreme form of persecution where you take the life of somebody just because of their faith, right? But I mean, and as you mentioned, there's other people who experience persecutions who don't necessarily die for their faith, right? And that's one thing also
Right.
that I noticed living here in this region. I could actually probably say for the first time, just because of being here on the ground. And what I noticed is that persecution is not always overt. It's not like always like a verbal opposition or physical opposition. It can be more like systemic, right?
Absolutely.
Where,
Yeah.
your access to certain spaces or opportunities is heavily restricted, heavily confined, simply because of your faith, right?
Right.
And it does put a lot of pressure on people who, are Christian in whether it's this part of the world or any other part of the world where, Christianity is persecuted. It puts a lot of pressure on them to make radical decisions, whether it's for the better or for the worse in terms of their faith, right? So yeah, that's something that I've kind of come to understand, but also to witness and in some ways experience, although I don't know if I would not say that I've faced the brunt or the worst of it by any means whatsoever.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, being in a Muslim country, I think I can understand what you're saying a little bit there because that's the dominant culture,
Yeah.
So that's inevitably going to affect, accessibility and just being part of the in crowd when you're a minority group. And I think that just generally is true with any type of demographic. But now I think it is being more dominantly an issue with Christianity. And not only in a Muslim country, but shockingly, even in the United States, you see that being an issue. And that's kind of what I was referring to when we're looking at these numbers, 365 million worldwide being persecuted. I think when you talk about it not just being a physical attack and these brutal killings like what we're seeing in Nigeria, but when it's an ideological opposition, when it's this liberal versus conservative Christian values, now that number may extend even greater.
Yeah.
And I think in the United States, that's absolutely felt as well, that you are, even in the workplace, in politics, in the
Yeah.
culture, just even in the grocery store, if you're
Right.
in a certain place wearing a cross or wearing a certain type of, symbol or representing Christianity in an overt way, you might get some looks, you might get some comments and even aggressive verbal altercations. In the United States. We see things like this all the time.
Yeah.
So it's pretty intense. But coming back to the Nigeria situation, this kind of uprising of these radical groups is very concerning to me. Something I've been thinking about is because a lot of times, well, if it's been going on for the last 15 years, let's say in Nigeria, and I know that it's happening in other countries in Europe. This is starting to become an issue in obviously countries like North Korea or Somalia,
Yeah.
Pakistan, Libya. It's been an issue for a long time. And the reason why it seems to persist is because there's a relationship or an allowance between the government and some of these groups. So I wanted to just kind of talk about that for a minute here. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I think that is something we're definitely seeing in Europe. In London, England, there's a lot of protests around this. Government officials who are in alignment with some of the ideologies with groups that do have these radical expressions.
Yeah. So yeah, I can't speak too much on like specific.
In Nigeria, I believe this is part of what's maybe it's relevant to the conversation, but isn't the president the Muslim?
Actually, I believe so. I have to double check that.
Yeah, maybe fact check that, but
Definitely
I'm
have to
pretty
fact
sure
check
that
but
that may be the case there.
yeah, but I do know. So I mean, obviously in countries that are like majority Muslim, like not even, you know, Nigeria, but like maybe like Malaysia or, you know, Indonesia or wherever else, like Saudi Arabia or where else, that is definitely the case. For me, what is surprising is that you observe such heavy and sometimes even surprisingly extreme forms of persecution against Christians in places like the UK, right?
Right.
Or in other parts of Europe where, I mean, these governments are known for being, at least in today's day and age, pretty secular, right?
Yes.
And so it's to me at least it's surprising because my thought is, okay, if you're secular, shouldn't you permit like at baseline like a tolerance, right, of all, you know, religions or different groups, and especially given your history as being very heavily Christian in terms of like your principles and such. Like it just seems to me a little bit, I asked myself like what happened basically, where it's like how did you know, not just government but society kind of just swing completely to the opposite side of the pendulum, where it's like, you know, it
Right.
was initially like, God save the queen, and literally like to now nobody can talk about God, nobody can talk about Christianity, you're not allowed to publicly talk about your faith, or you could be arrested and such. Like to
Yeah.
me, that's like,
And the same
how did
is
that?
going in the United States as well. They removed
Right,
prayers from public school. That was a long time ago, you know,
right,
and removed any kind of religious education or affiliated sort of sentiments from school and politics for the most part. And
yeah,
there's this battle going on there. And I think at least what appears to be the dominant opinion, which in fact is not, because you see how the voting comes out in the United States, but there is this very loud voice for these secular and liberal ideologies and moral stances.
hmm,
And I think again now we're seeing this connection between government and the oppression or persecution of religion, specifically Christian values and teachings. So even in the United States, with some of the main voices having this type of stance with morality and liberal views, I think it is part of the reason why we're seeing a rise in persecution
mm,
and attacks on Christianity, whether it's in the media or even the physical attacks. So, you know, for America compared to Nigeria or North Korea is
right,
an extreme example.
right,
I think that there's a relationship there
yeah,
in what's permitted. And just on a global scale as well, why the information is so suppressed around what's happening to Christian communities all over the world. I think
that's
the world community, the world politics, if we could say there was one, and you know, I think there's some vague trends and agreements and sort of how different world leaders talk about these things or the culture of some of the most influential countries. I think, you know, they control the media outlets.
yeah.
So then they control the narratives and the oppression, and as well I would go as far as to say the promoting or the creating a space where these things are actually now trending upward.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I also just looked up.
So it's a little lofty. I hope that was
No, yeah. I was taking a second just to confirm what we were talking about before, whether the president of Nigeria is Muslim, and it turns out he is. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just saying I think there's
Yeah. Correlation.
a correlation.
There's
Yeah.
definitely a relationship.
Relationship between government and politics,
Yeah.
specifically, and how that affects Christianity, Christian communities around the world.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
You know, I was also reading that these groups, these jihadist groups in Nigeria, they aim to eradicate Christianity from the country in the next 50 years. That's the goal.
That's the goal.
That's the goal.
Like this is like what do you mean? Like that's a manifesto or something out like that they're saying this, or
I don't know if it's written, but this was the Catholic World Report
Got
from
it.
their information on some of these groups like that,
Yeah.
and why it is increased. There is an agenda to completely turn
wow.
the country into a Muslim nation. Now, this is not just about, of course, Muslim. I'm not talking about Islam in particular, but just the persecution against Christianity.
Yeah, I mean, because there's other societies like in China, like
Exactly. So North Korea has essentially the same agenda.
yeah,
Egypt, I've heard, is also trending this way. Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Libya, Pakistan, Algeria. So there's a lot of movement for just the removal of Christian communities and people. And I thought that was so interesting because Christianity at its core is totally nonviolent.
right,
And I just thought you don't hear that type of trend or that agenda or that rhetoric about other religions. At least I don't. I mean, obviously there's Israel, Palestine, and that situation there, which is a similar sentiment of driving the other out.
right.
And there's some voice for other groups and communities being driven out, but Christianity seems to be the number one. If I'm just looking at what I'm seeing in some of my research here,
Yeah,
and they're totally nonviolent.
yeah.
So what do you think is the big threat?
So I think because like we agreed, it's not just, religious groups trying to push out Christians, right? It's also societies like North Korea or China, which are largely agnostic or atheistic. And so I think
and in America, right,
in
the same
America,
thing with the liberal
and
views and secular views, same agenda, just to push out Christianity.
So I think
they're the target time and time again.
Partly it's an issue of, I don't know if you'd call it like a sociological perspective, but just the desire for conformity, right, in a society, or the push for conformity. So if you have a society that you're trying to create where everybody is thinking the same way, everybody has the same beliefs, whether it's, you're Muslim or you're atheist, agnostic, whatever it is, and then you have a group, say Christians, who are living in a very different way, completely, almost like that's opposed to your ideology, then that poses a threat. That poses a threat to the security of the society you're trying to develop and build. It poses a threat to...
When you say security, what do you mean?
Just in some ways, like even predictability, right? Okay. So if you create a society and you're pushing and pulling the levers because you understand the society you've created, right? Okay. You have like principles that you want everybody to abide by. You have an infrastructure you've set up that behaves in this way because this is how you've created it to be. But then you have like this, anomaly that it kind of throws things off, right? Then that's an issue for you. That disrupts the unity and the security of what you're trying to build, right? Sure. So, and I think this was even, something that in the Bible was pretty evident, right? Where, you had Jesus living during the time of the late Roman Empire, and the Jewish community, the Jewish people in Israel and Jerusalem at the time, in order not to be pushed out and totally wiped out by the Romans, they were paying taxes to Caesar, right? And as long as they did that, they were kind of like left alone. But when Jesus came on the scene, and there was like the supposed threat of him, not paying taxes, right? Because that was one of the questions that kind of came up, where they were like, hey, do we pay taxes to Caesar or no, right? And not getting into like what his response was, but even just that question of like, hey, like, should we do this? Like that brings a level of insecurity to a society, because if they had stopped paying taxes, like, they're gone. They get wiped out. That makes sense.
So I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I don't know if I completely agree.
Okay.
Because even in that story, Jesus did pay the tax.
He did.
Right? So this was kind of my point here is that by their own standards, Christian community, at least by this Bible, by the teachings of Jesus, the Christian community is called to abide by the ruling authorities. Yeah. And they're actually a non-threatening, conformist community when it comes to the laws of the land. They're non-violent. They're not aggressive by nature. If you look at the example of Jesus and his teachings and the standard he sets for those who would follow him. Now, of course, that has not historically always been the case.
Right.
But if we're looking at what are the actual teachings and the moral values of this group, if the ruling group, community, authority, politics, if they tapped into that, the Christians actually would be an incredible support to building up the nation.
Right. I think it's deeper than that,
Well,
though.
that's what I'm trying to get at.
Right.
And I think it is deeper than that.
Because it's not just like, yes, because Christians were called to, obey the laws of the land, to accept the authority, right? That
is so disruptive then, or seen as such a threat to the powers that be. Because I think that's actually the issue.
Yeah.
Is that they understand maybe, or at least on a spiritual level, because this is really all spiritual at the end of the day. I don't think even some of the groups that are in power and that are oppressing Christian values are not even realizing what's going on here. But yes, that is the case, is that a Christian should submit to a worldly authority because they're submitted to God's authority.
Right.
But they're not simply submitting to the worldly authority.
Right.
And I think that's felt. I believe that's actually the war that's going on here.
Yeah. Because if, for example, this worldly authority that you can see commands you or dictates that you do something that violates the authority of God, that's where there's friction.
Right.
And because a Christian is unwilling to do that, or should be unwilling to do that, and be willing even to be put to death because of that, then that creates like an angst. It creates an anger. It creates just the perception of that you are a threat, right, to that like ruler, that authority, because in their mind they are the highest. Right. So if you refuse them, then that's it. Right. There's nothing else left to do than to squash you. Right. To push you out, because once their authority, their perceived authority, is undermined, then that to them means that, okay, now other people are going to see that and also seek to undermine. Right. When it's not really about undermining that person's authority, it's about submitting to a higher authority. Right. And that is spiritual. That's something that, is not something you just like see, like, oh, I don't see this, other person who is in higher authority over this worldly ruler. It's a spiritual thing.
Yeah, and I just think of all of the examples in the Bible of exactly that. The one that comes to mind immediately is Daniel.
Yeah.
And as he was one of the closest confidants and the interpreter of the king's dreams.
Yeah.
And then he violates a rule set up by the king, which didn't align with God's law, God's rule, and he's thrown into the pit.
Yeah.
The lion's pit.
Yeah.
And then God saves him, because while you're obeying God's rule, you're obedient to the Father. Now you also share the protection of the Father.
Right.
He comes out, and then I think then the whole doesn't the king then issue a decree that now the whole nation should follow Daniel's God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. This is an amazing story. And all the people who falsely accused him were thrown into the lion's den too.
Right. And it wasn't even the king. The king was upset that he had to throw Daniel into the lion's den, but it was his political circle that was upset with Daniel, and that he was serving a God over the king.
Yeah.
So it's again this threat to, I guess, control or worldly authority, power.
Yeah.
Maybe it's even a pride thing. I have this title, I have this position, and while you're being compliant, I know that you don't actually view me the way I view myself.
Could also be jealousy.
Something like that. Jealousy, perhaps. Jealousy. Yeah. So, of course, that's the real issue. I think even with these issues going on in the nations and these religious battles and these political battles, it's really a war against the flesh and the spirit. There's a spirit of the flesh and this desire for worldly control, authority, and power. And then there's this godly authority and power that if you align yourself with this, it's in opposition to the world. So I think across all nations, we are seeing levels of persecution. And what's interesting is why. We can say, why is there a rise in the fight against persecution now more than before? And one thing that I also found interesting that I was reading about is looking at statistics in America.
Yeah.
There has been a decline in Christianity and a shift towards non-religious or kind of a secular affiliation for the general population until 2019. and then it kind of plateaued, where it's no longer going down. It's kind of seems to be leveling out.
Right.
And what I also think, and I haven't really researched this thoroughly, but we've seen a rise in persecution against Christianity. So here's my thinking here. So follow me here.
Sure.
So as Christianity is decreasing, you see the rise of this liberal and worldly ideology and agenda.
Right.
And this is fighting against Christianity. And one thing that I've noticed in the Bible is the more persecution was coming against the church,
Yeah.
the stronger the church became.
Yeah.
So
True.
this reverse of the trend of the declining Christianity is maybe because of the persecution.
Yeah.
That it's actually now increasing.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, I had not thought about that before. But I mean, that's definitely what we see in the scriptures, like when Stephen was martyred.
Right.
After he was martyred, oh man, it says that a great persecution broke out in Jerusalem. But what that effectively did was it scattered the disciples, it scattered the Christians to go to other places and preach the word, and more people heard about the message and were converted in those areas.
Right.
And then the church grew and it continued to grow.
Even in Nigeria, there's reports of the Christian communities just continuing to gather in the destroyed space of the former church. Like the Christian community, it only is getting stronger in these areas rather than being completely pushed out.
Yeah.
Now, there is a reality to the numbers dwindling, but those who remain are even more bold in their faith than before. And I think there's an incredible power in that.
Yeah.
Where there's a refinement almost, dare I say, without being insensitive to those who are dying in the process.
Yeah. What
What remains, just big picture within these communities, is even more potent, if you will.
Yeah.
Now, I think this also is the case with the recent Charlie Kirk assassination.
Yeah.
You see him killed, and in response, millions are rallying.
Yeah.
There's larger worship services, and the memorial was just this incredible event. Just it really became it seemed a focus on God. So I think that's a unique element to Christian community and Christianity that I don't know is prevalent in other followings or communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just say it's the way that Christians respond to tragedy and to persecution I would say, is very different from how the majority of the world responds. And because I would say there's like, kind of isolated individuals or, even maybe like families who have been brought up with a certain mindset who can respond positively to persecution or to hardship. Hardship maybe is a good word to use.
Yeah.
But the response that Christians have to persecution, like those, especially those with like just deep faith, it's really unlike anything else. Like literally, like your life is in danger. Like not even just your life, but the life of your family, the life of your friends.
Right.
And to still not just endure or hold to your faith, but even to be like joyful in different situations. Like that's what you see in the scriptures for sure. And I know this is happening in the world today. Like that's different. That is different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds me as well of the passage. I think it's, what is it? Acts maybe 5 or 6, where John and Peter are arrested.
Yeah.
And there's a meeting between the Jewish council of what they should do with these two Christians who are preaching Jesus in the public areas, and they think they should kill him.
Right.
And then I believe it's Gamaliel says, well, if this is of man, then it'll burn itself out.
Right.
It will fade.
Yeah.
But if this is of God, you'll only find yourself fighting against God.
Right.
So there's no sense in killing these guys because it's actually just going to persist anyway, because it's not about these guys. It is something much greater going on.
Right.
So I believe also right out of the scriptures, we're seeing the same type of response from the body of Christ, the Christian communities globally, in response to the persecution.
Yeah.
That it is becoming stronger. It's becoming more bold. It's becoming more influential. The truth is becoming more clear.
Yeah.
This is a group that actually they were just gathering and singing worship songs. And here's another group that's brutally killing them, oppressing them. Even in America, just the liberal viewpoint is typically very aggressive in how they combat the morality and the ideologies of the Christians.
Yeah.
And you don't so much see that from genuine Christian groups.
Right.
Of course, there's radicals on both sides, you can say, but generally, I'm just saying, you don't see that type of response, and yet the group becomes stronger.
Yeah.
And it's not because of the physical expression, but there's something deeper that is causing this thing to actually become greater.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I know it's interesting. I just, maybe.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, a little hard to put your finger on, maybe per se, but.
Yeah, a little, but I mean, it's very evident.
Yeah, I think it's there.
Yeah.
I think that is what we're seeing.
Yeah.
So, a tough situation, I think, for the Christians in the world right now. It's not great. Where do you think this will go?
I think kind of like you said, as, persecution rises, then, the number of Christians will probably dwindle a little bit, at least in the case where, there are martyrs. But out of those, they'll become stronger and I think it will continue to flourish. So I think now that we're in a period of heightened persecution, I think the word will spread more. I think that, I mean, as the scriptures say, and as the Christians experience in the Bible, like there was growth, but then there was also the introduction of false messages as well that would come, kind of either like a watering down of, or kind of like you even mentioned, like there's some like radical extremists who kind of align themselves with Christianity, who, maybe they do adopt, the violent or retaliatory way of going about it, or, they try and
that could happen,
alter things in their beliefs or in their way of life so that they're not, kind of sticking out or standing out as much, so they don't receive as much persecution. But nonetheless, I think that this refining will occur.
So overall, you think a refinement, strengthening?
Sure. Yeah. Overall strengthening.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Christianity has not gone anywhere in the last 2,000 years.
Nope.
I don't foresee this causing a major dent in that trend. In fact, I agree with you. I think it will become stronger, but I do also believe along the same lines of what we've been talking about, that it will probably get worse as it gets stronger.
Right.
The situations, the persecution, I believe will probably get more bold and violent ideologically and physically. I think that is what we'll see. But I think now more than ever is exactly as these communities have been doing. It's a time to double down and really dig in deep to our relationships with God, because that's really where the strength comes from, and that's who grants the victory.
Yeah.
It's not any type of physical retaliation, but it is just a strengthening of faith that will show in the end, where you stand. I think of the scripture in John 15, verse 18, where it says, if they hated me, they will hate you also. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also.
Yeah, I had that one in mind.
So, Jesus from the beginning, before he even was killed, before his persecution even came into full effect, he warned of times like this.
Yeah.
That would come.
Yeah, exactly. And I also was thinking of, Paul, who came after Jesus, who said, that if anyone wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus, they will be persecuted.
Right.
And so it's not something that we can avoid as Christians. It's actually from the mouth of Paul, it's a guarantee, and from Jesus actually, because just because of the nature of who Jesus is, because of the nature of his message, like it's going to cause friction. Like people are not going to like the message. People are not going to like you because of the message, because of him. And so that is something that, yes, I believe will get worse before it gets better. But I think it's also important for Christians to understand that it's not just some far off thing, right, that you will never experience, right? It's something that as Christians, you should expect to experience it. Like that's part of living a godly life.
Mm.
And I don't know if the word is embrace it or to simply accept it. But when you do, then it actually changes the way you live your faith.
Right.
And the things you're willing to go through for your faith.
Right.
Because you understand, okay, if I want to be like Jesus, then I need to be willing to go through the things that Jesus went through.
Yeah. Anyone who claims to be in me will live as I lived. Right.
Yeah.
1 John.
Yeah.
Amen to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think also just some closing thoughts here. I'm reminded of that quote that says I don't know exactly how it goes, but something like the worst type of evil is when good men say nothing in the face of evil. So I think the truth is that it is on our front door. If you're a Christian anywhere, it's on your front door.
Yeah.
And to say nothing, to shrink back in your faith, is actually to be fighting on the wrong side of the battlefield.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that looks like for everybody, maybe something a little bit different, but I think there has to be at least an awareness of what's going on and an intentional stand, or when there's opportunity to say something or create awareness or preach the gospel, simply. It's got to be done.
Yeah.
I think it's got to be done.
Yeah. And last thing I'll say on this too, kind of in that same vein, and that this was kind of triggered because you said we tend to shrink back.
Yeah.
Jesus lays out from the beginning that if you want to follow him, you have to be willing to not just deny yourself, but to take up your cross daily.
Right.
And he says, if you do not take up your cross, you cannot follow him.
Mm.
And even in, I believe it's Revelation, he says that he takes no pleasure in the one who shrinks back from death.
Yeah.
Which is like, whoa. So it's like from the onset, being a Christian means you're willing to, die, to be a martyr for the sake of not just like the gospel, but for the sake of your relationship with Jesus. So yeah, I think that is really important to accept for anybody, anywhere, at any time.
Amen. Well, I think that's a good place maybe to wrap things up on this theme here. But yeah, good talk. And I learned some things here. I hope you did as well. And, to any viewers out there, feel free to leave some comments there. And it is a controversial, it's a difficult theme to dig into, but very relevant in the events of the world right now. And I think we'll continue to see this topic played out in our daily lives, our reality on a global scale, and maybe even just in our own front yards.
Yeah.
So, thanks for joining us today for the KLBICC podcast, and we look forward to the next episode.